these are sound postcards, and throughout the 1960s and 70s, a time when Poland was under communist rule, these were a way that you could buy music. Now, the official name of these, well, I'll put it along the bottom of the screen, but there's no chance of me pronouncing that right without offending someone, so I've asked my computer to pronounce it for me, and apparently you pronounce it as
Pocztówka Dźwiękowa.
And that translates into sound postcard. These have been donated to me by a kind chap called Lucas, who lives in Poland. He was going through his late grandfather's things and found a stack of these, so he sent some over. And I'm grateful to him for doing that, because a few people over the years have mentioned these to me, but I've never seen one in person until now, and we'll get to hear these later as well. Now I've finally got one in my hands, they make me think they're kind of almost a cross between a flexi-disc and a Russian rib, or X-ray record, or bone record. They go by various names. Of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the flexi-disc. They are quite a bit thicker than a flexi-disc, though, not as flexi as the Russian rib. You might not be aware of those, although I'm quite sure a lot of people watching this are, because it's something that's very well documented online. But just in case you're unfamiliar, these are records that during a time when in Russia, this is starting in the 1950s, there was a demand for music that was unavailable. Western music, rock and roll, but also a lot of Russian music as well that just wasn't allowed. So some budding black market entrepreneurs had imported lathe cutters, but because they didn't have anything to cut the music into, they used the discarded X-rays from the hospitals. They'd burn a hole in the middle and cut a record. They could fit about 50 apparently rolled up down a sleeve and sell these surreptitiously down a back alley somewhere, or barter them, swap them for something else. Now, if you got caught doing this, highly illegal, you'd go to prison. In addition to that, they sounded terrible, and they were only good for a few plays before they were worn out, but still better than nothing, of course. If you want to hear Western music, this is how a lot of Russians first heard rock and roll. But in the 1960s, the Russian government decreed that it was all right for everyone to have a reel-to-reel tape recorder at home. So very soon the bone records were made obsolete because people just started swapping tapes, which sounded an awful lot better. Incidentally, the disc that I showed you with a skull on it is almost certainly a modern day fake, as are many of the ribs that you'll find for sale on eBay. By the time these tracks came out, the people in Russia would have been using tape instead. So yeah, the reason that these remind me of ribs, I think, is, well, they're peculiar to one particular communist country, this time Poland rather than Russia, though. In addition, they're very lo-fi, but, again, better than nothing. However, there are a couple of differences, the main one being that these were completely legal. These were sold in the shops. There was nothing black market about these. And in addition to this, they were also on the market later than the Russian records. Those were more 50s through to sort of early to mid 60s. These are 60s through to late 70s. Initially, they contained a single 45 RPM track recorded on a traditional size laminated card postcard. The picture would usually bear no relation to the audio. Now, after a while, the size of these postcards was increased, and then they could hold 2 tracks, often unrelated to one another. Right, I think it's time to play these. Now, I didn't want to play them on my main turntable and risk damaging its expensive stylus, so instead I'm going to play them on this Soundburger. There's a bit of an issue, though, that this record player only has a very small platter, which means the cards overhang the edge of it, and they're not very rigid. So to make sure they're lying flat, I've placed them on top of another record. So with that issue resolved, let's have a listen.
Nie myśl, że się skarżę. Dużo czasu jest. Na wiosła zaciska swą dłoń.
Now, the traditional way to play a sound postcard back in Poland in the 1960s and 70s would have been on a range of portable turntables called Bambinos. These were manufactured by the Polish company Phonica. Typical of portable record players of this era, these are mono machines, but that's fine as all the sound postcards are also mono. What's perhaps a little bit less than ideal though is that turntables like this could be a little bit rough on vinyl records, so just imagine what they'd do to a piece of cardboard. Given the delicate nature of a laminated postcard, I'm quite sure that what we're hearing here is not this at its best. It would have sounded its best on its very first play, but it would have deteriorated pretty quickly after that. Much the same as with a flexidisc. The more you play it, the worse it sounds. Especially considering that this would have been on a turntable with a tone arm which is putting about 10 grams worth of pressure on a piece of cardboard. I don't think it would take more than a few plays before this thing really lost much of its sound quality. There was one thing that you could do with these though. Back in the 1960s in Poland, you could go into a kiosk and you could record a greeting to go on the beginning of one of these, a short greeting, perhaps to a family member. You could say, hello mum, happy birthday, hope you enjoy the music. Then you'd add a couple of tracks of your choosing after it, and then of course you could have sent it off, although looking at these, I don't believe many of them were sent to people. It was used more as a music format than as a postcard. But yeah, I mean, doing that, you must have felt a little bit like a DJ. This is a message to Alan from everyone at the factory. We hope you get well soon. Now here's your favourite track, Warsaw Taxi Driver.
Nie wiem czemu wybrałem ten fakt. Wielu twierdzi, że lepsze bywają.
Now, of course, if there were any of those greetings on any of these postcards, that would be of interest to the family. A bit of nostalgia, family history, voices from the past. Lucas asked me to look out for any of those intros on any of these postcards. I've played through them all. Unfortunately, there's none here. But yeah, I think that's a pretty cool thing. I would have found that quite entertaining. I would have definitely recorded a few of my own personalised postcards back in the day. Perhaps the self-destructive nature of the cardboard postcards is why they moved on to making these harder plastic versions. Now these are still single-sided, they've still got 2 tracks on them, often unrelated to one another, and you'll find the name of the track and the artist either etched into the edge or in the centre of the sheet. They sound quite a bit louder than the card ones, but they do still sound pretty rough now though. Anyway, let's have a listen.
Kilometrów 100 od zdrady. Jestem, gdy zimny w kinie siedzę, bo tylko ciebie kocham, o tobie śnię. Lecz zrozum, że prócz miłości jest.
Ciemno już, tylko tańczy po ścianach świecy blask. Jeden taniec oddaj mi, czekam już tyle dni.
Now, when I was reading up on these, most of the articles that I could find seems to suggest that they were used as a way for people in Poland to listen to Western music. Now, my experience with these has been the opposite. They're all in Polish. Well, I say all. There's one exception. This card contains a song from the French singer Muriel Mathieu, as well as T-Rex. It hardly plays. It skips about all over the place. But yeah, it's the original version of that. There are a few here that are covers of Western songs, and of course this is just one person's collection. Maybe the ones they bought, they weren't interested in Western music, they wanted the Polish ones. But it just goes to show that there was more to this than just people trying to get dodgy copies of Western pop hits. Incidentally, any music from the West that found its way onto these sound postcards wasn't officially licensed. It would either have been copied from a record or sometimes even just recorded off Radio Luxembourg. There was no attention being given here to either copyright or sound quality. For me, these plastic versions of the postcard records raise a few unanswered questions. I mean, they're clearly mass-produced, so at the point when you're making something like this, why don't you just make a normal record? Why do you have to carry on making these weird square one-sided records? I mean, maybe the production facilities just weren't there. Maybe it's the material they're made out of. Maybe these were cheaper and sold alongside normal records. Or maybe there's another reason. It's interesting to see the back of these still has an etching on there, as though you could have used it as a postcard, but you try using a piece of plastic as a postcard, it would be difficult. But I've got to wonder whether that's something to do with getting around a law, perhaps an old arbitrary one that said that maybe novelty musical postcards are fine, whereas records aren't. I really don't know the why behind this. Every article I've seen has explained the who, the where, the when, but not the why. Irrespective of a few unanswered questions, which perhaps people know the answers to and could put them in the comments below, this has been fascinating to me to look at a little slice of Polish communist rule history from the 1960s and 70s. And just imagine if you'd spent your youth growing up listening to your pop hits on these things, and then as an adult you finally got hold of a CD player and listened to those same tracks again in proper quality. It must have been a bit of a revelation. I mean, much more than just going from a proper vinyl record to a CD. I mean, these things were so lo-fi. Must have blown your socks off the first time you heard them properly. But thanks to Lucas for sending these things over, because this really has been very interesting for me. Hope you've enjoyed having a look at this here today as well. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.